So from 1924 to 1972, J. Edgar Hoover is director of the FBI, the man in charge, and that's 48 years, nearly half a century. And during that time, 8 presidents are elected, 3 wars fought, 2 states admitted to the Union, and Hoover remains. He is untouchable, this immovable object. He's the longest serving FBI director in history, and when he dies, he's the only civil servant ever to be lain in state. And his legacy is so weird. It's strange. It's almost schizophrenic. On the one hand, you have this very popular, very forward-thinking, effective, capable administrator who revolutionizes the way we do criminal investigations. He uses science and technology to investigate crime, and at one point it's harder to become an FBI agent than it is to be accepted into Harvard. On the other hand, you have this covert, conniving Men in Black type figure who blackmails Martin Luther King Jr., who uses his power to infiltrate and harass political groups he disagrees with, like the anti-war and civil rights movement. And it seems contradictory, right? How can someone who is so good at what he did, who really laid the foundations for the modern the FBI as we know it today, be so horribly corrupt and racist? But I don't think it was to Hoover. So in 1968, Hoover sits down with CBS News for an interview, and he says something that I want us all to think about today, because I think it helps explain his philosophy, and really what's been the philosophy of the modern American justice system, which he helped create. And this is what he said. Justice is merely incidental to law and order. But what is justice? Maybe a better question, who is justice? Standing outside the United States Supreme Court building is a blindfolded goddess with a sword in one hand and a scale in the other. We know her as Lady Justice, but the Romans called her Justitia. She represents impartiality, balance, strength, the Roman concept of justice. Their word for it was equitas. It's the root of our word equity. It means equality. Equitas meant that you were judged fairly, that you got what you deserved, received what was due to you. According to Cicero, the famous Roman statesman and philosopher, justice was a fundamentum of civic peace, an essential feature of the law. But that's all it was. It was an aspect of the law, a way of maintaining peace and quiet. Roman magistrates were not charged with maintaining justice, but peace. Peace, not justice, was an essential value of civic life, and anything that stood in the way of peace was destroyed. This was a departure from the way the ancient Athenians had thought about justice. Their word for it was dikaiosne. It means righteousness, the act of doing good. Plato thought that justice was about goodness as well as obedience to the law. It was a virtue. You obeyed the law not because it was the law, but because it was good. Justice for the Greeks was still about balance and equality and harmony, but it was less about the state and the peace and more about the community and the good. The Israelites had similar ideas. Their word for it was tzedakah. Like dikaiosne, tzedakah means righteousness. And like the Greeks, the Hebrews believed that justice was a virtue. Their law was written by God. It was God. And so their law was perfect. But if the law was perfect, and men aren't, how can anyone follow the law? The Hebrew definition of justice goes one step further. Tzedakah can be translated as righteousness, but it can also mean charity. For the Israelites, justice was God's judgment and his mercy. And this is the key distinction. For the Greeks and the Hebrews, justice is the goal. For the Romans and in the United States today, justice is a means to an end. Justice is incidental to law and order. The United States justice system has become marked by its questionable effectiveness and undeniable inequality. America has failed in its pursuit of justice because it never pursued justice in the first place. Only law and order. If we want change, then we need a fundamental shift in the way we think about crime and criminals. We need to see them as Christ sees them, not as monsters, but as men. How many people here have seen Scared Straight, the TV show? clip, something. Okay, if you haven't seen it, this is what it is. Scared Straight is a TV show on A&E where they take kids with behavioral issues on a field trip to prison, and they just yell at them like for a week. They just yell at them, and these are bad kids. Like a lot of them are there for theft, fighting, gang activity. One kid stabbed his dad, and they break them down, right? And it's very fun to watch. The prison guards yell at them. The inmates yell at them. Sometimes their parents stop by and they yell at them. It's very entertaining. I spent more time watching it than I did writing my thesis. And the whole point of the show is that by the end of all this, they're scared straight, right? They terrify them with prison so that they'll kind of reform their ways and become good. And a major focal point of the show is that at the end, each kid has like an interview where they say, they're good, they're ready to go back to their lives, they've changed. Here's the thing though. The program is a total failure. Scared Straight does not work. Children who participate in the program are 60 to 70% more likely to wind up in prison later in life than their peers who don't. They're worse off than those of similar backgrounds. And coincidentally, Scared Straight has a failure rate similar to the US recidivism rate. According to the Bureau of Prisons, inmates in state prisons have about a 70% chance of being rearrested and reincarcerated within 5 years of their release. And a 26 study by the United States Sentencing Commission found that inmates in federal prisons fared marginally better at 50%, but that doesn't mean much since only about 10% of inmates are incarcerated in federal prisons. And the fact remains, when the US has the highest incarceration rate in the world, and more prisoners than any other nation on earth. And these are mostly people with low incomes, mostly Black and Hispanic. 60% of inmates have a history of substance abuse, and just under half show signs of serious mental illness. And the fact remains, when people come out of our prisons and jails, they do not come out rehabilitated, they do not come out reformed. More often than not, they end up right back where they started, if not worse off. So the question is, why is corrections so bad at correction? And I think the answer lies in the purpose of our justice system. See, our justice system is designed to maximize punishment. It's designed to brand you as a criminal. It's intended to wreck your life, right? Let me give you an example of how this works. The iPhone XS Max was recently released, and it cost over $10,000. Or sorry, $1,000. It's $1,000. Say I'm accused of going out and stealing the new iPhone XS Max, and say I'm one of those kids who participated in Scared Straight. My criminal record is not clean. I have a history of shoplifting and other petty theft. I'm now 18. This is theft in the second degree, a Class C felony. If I'm arrested, I could be facing up to 5 years in prison and a fine of $10,000. And at this point, I've been arrested, I've been charged, and now I have a couple of options. If I can afford it, I can hire a lawyer, and we can try to go to trial and get an acquittal, which is unlikely since only about 10% of trials end in a not guilty verdict. We have a 90% conviction rate in the US. 90% of trials end in a guilty verdict. If I don't have the money to hire my own lawyer, and I work at McDonald's, so probably, I'll be assigned a public defender, and my public defender is going to pressure me to take a plea deal. He'll pressure me to admit my guilt in exchange for possible lighter sentencing. He'll offer me 2 years in prison instead of 5, $1,000 fine instead of a $10,000 fine. And I'll probably take that plea deal because that's what 90% of people do. 90% of criminal cases never go to trial. And 90% of cases that do go to trial end in a guilty verdict. I think that's a little bit unsettling. If I'm convicted of stealing an iPhone today and sentenced tomorrow, I won't get out of prison until all of my senior class over there has graduated college. And when I get out of prison, I'll be $10,000 in debt to the United States government. A debt I can't pay because every time I fill out a job application, the first question they ask is, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And of course, I have. So now, with no job, no education, and a criminal record, I've effectively been excommunicated from society. My options are now incredibly limited in the legal economy. I'll probably turn to drugs and crime to sustain myself, and I'll most likely be in and out of prison until I die. And this situation is so incredibly common, especially among the poor and the people of color. 12% of the US is African American, but among those behind bars, that number jumps to 65%. White people and black people use drugs at about the same rate, but if you're black, you're much more likely to be arrested for drug possession. If you're a black teen convicted of a crime, you'll probably receive a harsher sentence than a white teen convicted of the same crime. In 2014, Ethan Couch was 16 years old and driving drunk when he hit and killed another car, killing all 4 occupants on impact and injuring several others in a crash. Couch was convicted. He was convicted on 4 counts of manslaughter, but in an attempt to lighten his sentence, he argued that he was suffering from something he called affluenza, right? It was essentially, he was so rich that he couldn't understand the weight of what he had done. He was too wealthy to be responsible for his crimes. And it sounds ridiculous, but that worked. That worked. He never spent a day in jail for his crime, and he was only required to attend a rehab facility for about 3 months. Contrast that with the case of Eric Miller. Miller was also convicted of a drunk driving accident. He was driving a stolen pickup truck drunkenly when he hit and killed a man walking on the side of the road. For that crime, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was also 16 at the time. And the kicker is, the same judge who sentenced Miller to 20 years behind bars in 2004 sentenced Couch to rehab and less than 10 years probation in 2014. And the difference between the two, one was rich and white, the other was black and poor. One had the money to hire a high-powered attorney, the other was stuck with an underfunded, underpaid, overworked public defender. And while Couch is walking around free today, Miller won't get out of prison until 2024, and his story will undoubtedly look like that of so many others trapped in an endless cycle of crime and punishment. And this is the reason behind our broken criminal justice system. It's the reason why we see so many people coming in and out and back again to prison. When J. Edgar Hoover said that justice is incidental to law and order, it wasn't a criticism. In a time when Gallup poll listed crime as the #1 issue facing the nation, the lawman was a popular figure. Americans sought someone to keep them safe, someone to protect the citizens from the criminals, the men from the monsters. So they put barriers between them and us, barriers that stayed up long after the prisoners had left the prison. They made it hard for them to gain access to public housing, college education, food stamps. Recidivism rates are high because it's what we expect. And re-entry into the community is rare because we make it rare. When justice is incidental to law and order, goodness is incidental to lawfulness. Lawfulness becomes goodness. We think that following the law makes us good, and if anyone breaks the law, then there must be something wrong with them, so we cast them out. Because when right and wrong are as simple as innocent and guilty, the higher law, which no one can follow, becomes less. Our standard of righteousness is lowered. Our justice becomes shallow. Equitas isn't enough. Equality and equity aren't enough. They're good, okay? They're good. Don't get me wrong. But they should be the bare minimum. At the very least, we should be treated equally under law. Like, great. We're not North Korea. No, justice must be more than mere equality. It needs to be righteousness, goodness, virtue. It needs to come from God, otherwise it's nothing. It can be twisted and manipulated to mean anything and to serve any purpose. So most criminal justice reform today is focused on nonviolent drug offenders at the federal level, where they make up about half of the prison population. By the end of his second term in office, President Obama had commuted the sentences of about 2,000 nonviolent drug offenders, and in December 2018, the First Step Act passed, which aims to reduce the risk of recidivism by kind of pulling back those laws that brought mass incarceration in the first place. And that's good, that's great. We don't need to be putting addicts into prison anymore. It's stupid, it's barbaric, it's counterproductive. On this, I think most people agree. But nonviolent drug offenders account for less than 20% of the total prison population and under 15% of state prisons. Focusing on only the most sympathetic of inmates will not get us far in the long run. The people in our prisons are violent. They are murderers, they are thieves and abusers and liars. But they're not monsters. They're men. They're terrible people, but we're all terrible people. Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It doesn't say some people are good, other people are bad. It doesn't say the wicked will go to heaven. Sorry, the righteous will go to heaven, the wicked will go to hell. It says we're all evil, we're all bad, we're all sinful, we're all in need of saving. We need to have this idea of justice that seeks to do good, okay? It's in the Gospel of Mark. So in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is he's sitting and eating with tax collectors, right? And the Pharisees, those evil guys, they come up and they ask him, what are you doing? Why are you eating these people? They're evil. And Jesus responds, he says, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. We can't just reserve justice and mercy for the people we like, who made mistakes that didn't cause much harm. It needs to be for everyone, the worst of the worst. I don't believe in second chances because deep down we've all got some sort of inner good. I believe in second chances because deep down we're all rotten to the core. And okay, a lot of us are thinking, okay, pump the brakes, buddy, hold on. The people who are in prison for a reason, okay? And the reason incarceration is high is because crime is high. If incarceration were low, crime would drop, right? Peter Carsonell, a writer for the National Review, says as much. Rehabilitation, he writes, is one purpose of incarceration. Incapacitation, that is, the inability to commit additional crimes, is another. And incapacitation, obviously, is more effective than rehabilitation because it works on everyone. And it's the reason overall crime has been declining for the past 2 decades. And that's not true. But that's not true. But, you know, these are valid concerns, right? I don't think we should abolish prisons. I don't think, you know, we should give everyone easy sentences. But I do think focusing on incapacitation and punishment is a mistake. And it's a mistake we've been making for the past 50 years. And his claim that incarceration leads to a drop in crime, like I said, it's not true. Study after study have shown there's no association between incarceration and crime. And according to the Vera Institute, increased incarceration has a marginal to zero impact on crime. And in some cases, it even leads to an increase in crime. And the fact is this, we've been doing mass incarceration for over 50 years. Why would we continue to waste time and money and lives on something that's been an abject failure? And another portion of us are thinking, okay, time out, hold on, pump the brakes again, stop sign. Doesn't the Bible also say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? We shouldn't be going easy on criminals, we should punish them harshly. And to that I have 2 things to say. First, when the Bible talks about eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, it's making a statement about proportionality and justice. Essentially, the punishment should fit the crime, right? If I steal that iPhone, I shouldn't have to give over 5 years of my life and $10,000 to the state, I should give it back. And if I stole it, then I should pay for it, right? And second, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells us to turn the other cheek. And Peter tells us not to repay evil with evil, but evil with good. And that is the idea behind rehabilitative justice. It's the idea that we should repay evil with good, that it's never wrong to be kind to others. And ultimately, I think if we truly believe that justice is going to come from God, then we'd be less concerned with everyone getting their just desserts and more concerned with doing good. This is what we need. Prisons that seek to uplift and not destroy. A definition of justice that seeks to do good, not just provide equality. A culture that sees the worst of the worst as deserving of mercy because Christ gave us mercy. And we need a justice system that looks less like this blindfolded goddess with her sword and her scales, and more like Christ, who sees men's blackened souls and with his arms outstretched says, "Come, kneel down, repent, and be free." Thank you.